It started with the flyer. Thin paper, slightly crumpled, its corners damp from the rain. I found it on my windshield late one October evening as I left the grocery store. The parking lot was empty, save for a few scattered cars beneath flickering lights. The text, printed in clean, bold letters, caught my attention. Are you tired of being tired? Participants needed for a revolutionary insomnia study. Generous compensation, no prior experience required. Beneath it, a phone number and an address, one I didn't recognize. The promise of payment piqued my interest more than the premise. After all, rent was due, and my bank account was withering. Besides, sleep had always been a fickle companion. What harm could it do? The next night, I found myself standing outside a nondescript building on the edge of town. The address led me here, to a squat structure with blank walls and a single lit window. A small sign above the door read, Somnus Institute. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. The receptionist, a pale, wiry man with glasses perched too low on his nose, greeted me with a clinical smile. His eyes, though, carried something else. You must be Victor, he said, as though he'd been expecting me. How did you know? We've been waiting. He gestured toward a clipboard. Sign here. The pen felt heavy in my hand. As I scrawled my name, the faint sound of tapping reached my ears. Somewhere down the sterile corridor, someone, or something, was pacing. This way, the receptionist said, leading me deeper into the building. The hall stretched unnervingly long, lined with identical doors marked only by numbers. The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows that seemed to linger a fraction too long. My guide stopped in front of room 42 and pushed the door open. The room was sparse, just a bed, a small table, and a single observation window set high into the wall. I glanced at the glass, expecting to see my reflection. Instead, there was only blackness, as though the other side of the window swallowed light. You'll be comfortable here, the receptionist said, his tone devoid of warmth. We'll monitor you from the control room. Monitor me for what, exactly? I asked, unease coiling in my stomach. He smiled again, tighter this time. All will be explained in due time. Before I could press further, he left, the door clicking shut behind him. I sat on the bed, its mattress stiff and unyielding. The silence in the room was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of unseen machinery. I leaned back, trying to relax, but my gaze kept drifting to the observation window. That night, sleep didn't come. By the third night, I noticed the figures. The schedule was simple. Eat the prepackaged meals delivered to my door, complete occasional cognitive tests on the provided tablet, and rest as much as possible. Resting wasn't the issue. It was the sleeping. The first night had been uneventful, an endless stretch of staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the paint. By the second, I began to feel the weight of my sleeplessness pressing on my chest. My thoughts grew sluggish, edges fraying like the hem of an old shirt. But on the third night, things changed. I was lying on the bed, staring at the observation window. The faint hum of the machinery felt louder now, its rhythm unsettlingly erratic. My eyelids drooped, heavy with the kind of fatigue that made your limbs feel distant, unreal. I wasn't asleep, though. Not really. That's when I saw it. A movement behind the glass. I bolted upright, my pulse quickening. It was subtle, a shadow flitting across the black pane, there and gone in an instant. I strained my eyes, waiting, but the window revealed nothing. Just my imagination, I thought. Sleep deprivation playing tricks. But then it happened again. This time the shadow lingered, a shape vaguely human, silhouetted against the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. I approached the window slowly, each step echoing unnaturally loud in the confined space. The figure didn't move, didn't react. Its outline shimmered slightly, as though it weren't entirely solid. "Hello?" My voice wavered. The figure remained motionless. I reached the window, placing a tentative hand on the cold glass. The moment my fingers touched the surface, the shadow dissolved, melting into the blackness. I stumbled back, my heart hammering. Was someone there? A researcher, perhaps? It felt like something more. Something wrong. The next morning, I asked the technician who brought my meal about the window. She blinked at me, her face betraying nothing. "There's nothing on the other side," she said, her tone clipped. "It's a one-way mirror. You're imagining things." Her explanation should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. That night, as the hum of the machinery resumed, I lay in bed and stared at the window. The figure was back, and this time, it wasn't alone. I hadn't slept in 5 nights. By now, the edges of reality had begun to warp. The smooth white walls of my room seemed to pulse faintly, their surfaces shifting in time with my heartbeat. The machinery's hum, once subtle, now throbbed with a dissonant rhythm that echoed in my skull. And the shadows, they had multiplied. The first figure, the one I'd seen in the observation window, no longer stood alone. Now there were several, dark, faceless forms that moved languidly, as if gliding underwater. They drifted in and out of view, their shapes blending with the blackness of the glass. None of them made a sound, at least not at first. It started with faint whispers, a murmur at the edge of my hearing. The voices overlapped, speaking in tones that were simultaneously urgent and incomprehensible. I couldn't discern the words, but the intent felt clear. "Watch us." I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, a side effect of exhaustion. But the whispers grew louder, their cadence more insistent. On the 6th night, something changed. I was pacing the room, my fingers fidgeting with the frayed hem of my shirt, when I noticed the scratches. They were faint, etched into the walls like the scrawls of a restless artist, overlapping lines, spirals, and jagged symbols. At first, I thought I'd done it, maybe in some sleepless fugue. But the marks were too precise, too deliberate. One symbol stood out among the others, a circle, split in half by a jagged line. It was familiar in a way that made my skin crawl, like I'd seen it before in a dream I couldn't remember. As I traced the symbol with my fingers, the air in the room shifted. It wasn't a physical change, more like a subtle vibration, a distortion I felt in my bones. The lights dimmed, and the hum of the machinery became a low growl. That's when I saw the writing. It wasn't there before. Scrawled across the wall, just above the bed, were 3 words, jagged and uneven, as though carved in haste. "Stay awake now." My breath caught. The handwriting wasn't mine. A wave of nausea rolled through me as I staggered back, my legs unsteady. The whispers rose in intensity, their tone now laced with urgency. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding me in a cocoon of noise. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "Stop it!" I shouted, my voice cracking. And just like that, the room went silent. When I opened my eyes, the writing on the wall was gone. The scratches had vanished too, leaving the room's sterile surface unmarred. I collapsed onto the bed, shaking. Sleep beckoned, but I resisted. The words on the wall echoed in my mind, their message clear. Sleeping wasn't safe. The figures in the window watched me all night. The 7th day arrived with a dreadful clarity. I'd been avoiding the staff as much as possible, but that morning, I cornered the technician who delivered my meal. She seemed startled by my haggard appearance, her gaze flicking nervously to the shadows under my eyes. "I need to know what's going on here," I demanded. My voice was hoarse, my throat raw from lack of rest. The shadows, the whispers, what are you doing to me? Her expression shifted, a fleeting crack in her composed demeanor. She opened her mouth to respond but hesitated. Then, with a glance over her shoulder, she leaned in. "You're not the first," she whispered. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" She glanced at the observation window, her eyes narrowing. "They say the mind is the final frontier, but what they're really exploring..." Her voice faltered. "It's not just your mind they're reaching into." "Then what?" I pressed. Before she could answer, the door behind her creaked open. Another staff member appeared, clipboard in hand, his presence silencing her instantly. She gave me a fleeting look of pity before leaving without another word. I was left alone with the window. The figures were still there, but something about their movements had changed. They weren't just drifting now, they were reaching. Long, shadowy limbs pressed against the glass, their distorted forms straining against an invisible barrier. That evening, the machinery's hum grew louder, the vibration rattling my teeth. The symbols reappeared on the walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. The circle with the jagged line pulsated like a heartbeat, each thrum filling the air with an electric charge. I backed away, but the symbols seemed to follow me, spreading across the walls like a living thing. The whispers returned, louder than ever, their fragmented words forming a chorus. "The gate is opening." A sharp crack echoed through the room. I spun toward the observation window just in time to see a fracture spider across its surface. The shadows on the other side pressed closer, their forms coalescing into something larger, something alive. Panic surged through me. "What do you want from me?" I shouted. The fractured glass seemed to ripple in response, the shadows shifting into a singular, towering figure. It leaned close, its faceless head filling the window. Then, in a voice that resonated deep within my chest, it spoke. "The dreamer awakens." The room plunged into darkness, and the hum of the machinery stopped. All that remained was the sound of my own breathing, and the faint scratching of symbols on the walls. The darkness in the room was absolute. Not the kind that your eyes adjusted to, but an oppressive void that devoured every hint of light. I sat motionless on the bed, the air thick and stifling. The only sound was my heartbeat, pounding in my ears like a desperate drumbeat. Somewhere in the blackness, the whispering began again. It wasn't subtle this time. It surged all around me, a cacophony of voices layered atop one another, their words fractured and overlapping. "Time is thinning. The gate will open. Stay awake. Stay awake." I clutched the sheets, my knuckles white, my breathing shallow. My instincts screamed at me to escape. But where would I go? The room, once small and confining, now felt infinite. An endless expanse of shadow pressing against my mind. The glass of the observation window cracked again. I didn't need to see it to know. The sound was unmistakable. A fissure splintering across the barrier, sharp and deliberate. The whispers fell silent, replaced by a sound that chilled me to the bone. A low, resonant hum, deep and primal. It vibrated through the walls, the floor, my chest. It wasn't just a noise, it was a presence, something ancient and vast, pushing against the edges of reality. Then the lights flickered on. For a moment I was blinded, the sudden brilliance stabbing into my retinas. When my vision adjusted, the room was the same, or so I thought. The walls gleamed too brightly, their surfaces unnaturally smooth, as though they weren't made of plaster anymore. They pulsed faintly, like a living thing. And the window. It was no longer a window. The glass was gone, replaced by an open void. The shadows on the other side had bled through, coiling into the room like black tendrils of smoke. They moved with a serpentine grace, curling along the floor and up the walls, their touch leaving behind a faint shimmer of frost. I backed away, my pulse racing. From the heart of the void, a figure emerged. It wasn't like the others. This one was larger, its form solid yet shifting, its edges constantly in flux. It had no face, only a void where features should have been, but I could feel its gaze, a weight that pinned me in place. The hum grew louder, and the figure stepped forward. It didn't walk so much as glide, its movements defying the laws of physics. As it approached, the air around it warped, shimmering like heat rising from asphalt. "You!" Its voice was a whisper and a roar, a sound that filled the room and echoed in my skull. "You are the tether." "Tether?" My voice cracked. "Tether to what?" It tilted its head, a gesture almost human, and for a moment I thought it wouldn't answer. Then it raised one elongated limb, pointing to the symbols scrawled across the walls. "The Sleeper's Gate," it said, its tone reverent. "Through your mind the passage opens." I stared at the symbols, their glowing forms now pulsating in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. The circle with the jagged line blazed brighter than the rest, its light filling the room with an unearthly radiance. I shook my head, panic clawing at my chest. "Number I don't understand. I didn't agree to this." "You did." The figure's voice softened, its tone almost soothing. "When you entered this place, you bound yourself to the experiment. The waking world fades, and the dream ascends." I took a shaky step back, my heel brushing against the bed. The air felt thinner, harder to breathe, as though the room itself was unraveling. "I don't want this," I shouted, the sound raw and desperate. The figure loomed closer, its shadow enveloping me. "It is not what you want that matters. It is what must be." The hum reached a crescendo, a deafening wave that shook the room. The symbols flared one by one, their light merging into a singular, brilliant glow. The circle with the jagged line blazed brighter still, its edges warping as it seemed to twist open. I felt myself being pulled, not physically, but mentally, my thoughts unraveling, stretching toward the light. Memories flickered like moths against a flame, disjointed and fragile. And then, the light dimmed, the figure paused, its form wavering. The symbols faded into darkness, leaving the room eerily still. "You resist," it said, its voice tinged with surprise. I clenched my fists, summoning what little strength I had left. "I won't let you take me." A long silence followed. The figure stared at me, or at least I felt its gaze, before it began to retreat. The shadows coiled back into the void, their tendrils dissipating like smoke in the wind. "You have delayed the inevitable," it said, its voice receding into the darkness. "But the Sleeper's Gate remains. It is only a matter of time." And with that the void collapsed, the room returning to its sterile normalcy. I collapsed onto the bed, my body trembling, my mind reeling. The hum of the machinery resumed, faint and distant, like the echo of a nightmare I couldn't shake. Sleep came then, unbidden and heavy, pulling me into its depths. But even in the quiet of my dreams, I could still feel the weight of the figure's words. "It is only a matter of time."